There we go. Let's make it work. So, firstly, just to address why you're hearing from psychology today, sometimes I think when people hear about psychology and health, it sounds a bit odd. Where and why do we fit in? We think there's a really strong connection between mind and body. And so, any child who has a sort of lifelong chronic health condition, we're thinking today specifically about sickle cell, but they will have sometimes difficult thoughts, feelings, or behaviors linked with the physical and biological experience of that health condition, of the demands and the constraints and the physical impact of it. And when those thoughts might become particularly challenging or distressing, or it sort of gets in the way of them having a decent quality of life, that's where psychology might step in to be involved, to see if there's any ways of understanding or helping we can do to sort of limit or mitigate that felt experience of their health condition. If I were to put a sort of big circle around this image, it would be, I think Leanne mentioned earlier, the Nobody's Listening report. And I think meeting with you as educators, it's a really important context for us to keep in mind that many of these children and the families we work with come from this context where historically sickle cell has been sort of under researched and underfunded due to issues around race, racism, stigma. And many parents carry that. Many parents, sickle cell, with it being having a genetic link, runs in families, and many parents, directly or indirectly, have stories and experiences in their families or communities of people who didn't feel listened to, who didn't feel believed when they were reporting pain. And these are the ideas and experiences that the families carry with us. And that's how they reach you when these families come to you as educators. And I think that's really important because sometimes that the first step in creating a sense of safety for parents, right? Because it's sort of, when you step back and you think about it, with all those experiences, in a way, it's a bit of a leap of faith for parents to send children off to school and hope that they're cared for and trust that they're cared for well. And sometimes, from my experience, what makes a difference is first creating that sort of feeling of safety with parents. And that comes from you as schools and educators showing, yeah, I have some knowledge of this. We have an understanding of sickle cell, and also sort of being a bit confident and curious to ask what you might need to know more about. And I think that sends a really powerful message to families that you're listening and that you want to be able to care as best you can. And I think that often sets things off on a really good foot. That would be my experience. And I hope today that's what we're doing, is sharing a little bit of knowledge to help you feel, one, that you know a bit more, and two, maybe to have the confidence to ask a bit more and to show that you're curious. So our role as psychology is supporting children to understand their health condition. We do that in many ways, and it changes. What children are able to understand when they're very small is different from what they're able to understand when they're adolescents, for example. And so sometimes we get involved at different times developmentally to re-explain and to support as children readjust to what the condition means. And we support with any sort of emotional difficulties that come up from having sickle cell. We also have a crucial role supporting, I hope, with learning and education. So one of the core parts of our role is doing neuropsychological assessments. So thinking about sort of understanding a child's cognitive profile when there are concerns, or from you as school or from parents, about how a child is doing. And that helps us identify any areas of difficulties. I think it's important for you to know with schools as well. Sometimes you find yourselves in the position of needing to make a referral for a young person to have some support. I think the first port of call should always be parents, because they will know about their health team. So in many health teams, though it varies, there is embedded psychology. So at King's we have an embedded sickle cell psychology service, and we accept referrals for children when there is a difficulty sort of linked or related to sickle cell and health. If it's a difficulty that's a bit more general than that, for example, general anxiety or phobia, these types of things not related to sickle cell, then that referral would likely go to CAMS, so to a child and adolescent mental health service. It's important to know that both teams can be involved at once, but it's important to think about if someone's already involved, because we don't like to duplicate work that someone else is doing. That can be a bit confusing. So I think always parents are your first port of call, because if they know that you have a concern, they will be able to chat with their medical team to see what's available. So the types of things we help with are plentiful. We sometimes help with adherence to treatment by sort of trying to understand the barriers or the challenges for young people taking medication. Like I was saying, we help with sort of adjustment to the condition and what it means, what's sort of difficult about it. We might help with procedural distress. So sometimes that's around tolerating needles or transfusions, and we might try to make that process go a bit more smoothly and to reduce the anxiety around that. We might support. Sometimes children present with low self-esteem. I think with sickle cell, sometimes there are sort of visible elements in that children might from time to time experience jaundice, so a yellowing of the eyes. They might be sort of smaller in stature or experience delayed puberty, and that in a way can set them apart from their peers, which unfortunately means that sometimes they're more vulnerable to bullying, and they might experience sort of low self-esteem. We might support in these moments. We might support with pain management, with low mood, anxiety. We do neuropsychological assessments, and generally sort of trying to promote psychological well-being for all the children and young people we work with. We've put this here as well to think about. I guess as schools, sometimes you are the first people to notice some of these things that come up, or you hear about them directly from children, maybe even before parents or their health teams do. Often children report or experience sort of feeling different. That can be to do with sort of accommodations that schools offer. And this is why I think it's really important always to sort of be led by the child and family about what adjustments sort of feel acceptable and how they would like them to work without feeling too sort of singled out. Sometimes they feel a bit held back by not being able to do the same things as their peers. And just to keep a close eye out for any bullying, to have a bit of a low threshold for spotting that and checking in. Low self-esteem, low confidence. You might in the classroom from time to time see sort of strong or big emotions show up, and children might share worries with you about their health. We sometimes see anxiety and low mood. I think anxiety, particularly around transition points, can be really important to think about and to notice at school and to plan carefully for, just to go back to sort of limit the stressful periods. They might have questions. Why me? Why is this happening to me? And maybe sometimes difficult emotions, anger or frustration linked with that. Pica is something we see quite commonly in sickle cell, and the research isn't quite clear why. And pica is eating sort of non-edible, non-food items. Again, as schools sometimes, particularly at sort of primary school level, it's important to have a sort of low threshold just to be on the lookout for children sort of chewing on their sleeves, which might be one indication, or sort of notebooks that might be a bit torn. Sometimes children eat paper and things. So just keeping an eye out for that to mention to parents if it's something you notice or you're concerned about. Enuresis, so wetting the bed. We put this here thinking about children having sort of residential trips or school trips, and sort of carefully exploring if a child seems reluctant or doesn't want to join. To think about ways to manage that so the child doesn't have to miss out. I think all of these things are really important, because sort of keeping an eye out for them and being able to mention them gently to parents as they arise sort of makes the difference in supporting a child and creating an environment where they feel safe and supported. One of the most common experiences of sickle cell is pain, and that's it's quite a subjective experience. You can see here, we think, we understand it's made up from all of these things. Just to stop on a few past or previous experiences, if a child has had difficult past experiences with health, then they might carry lots of fears and anxieties with them when they have pain. Many children worry about as soon as they have pain, they worry that that will mean a hospital admission. Lots of them have lots of fears around hospital admissions. How long will I have to stay for? What will I miss out on? At the most extreme, some children fear that a hospital admission might lead even to dying. So, really big fears that can be attached to one's experience of pain. And I think mood is important and sort of emotional factors as well. If we are particularly low in mood or particularly worried, that can actually make our perception of pain. It can sort of magnify pain. So it's quite a subjective experience, and it's important to think about what we can do to support the child's environment. And in the same way, I think, like was mentioned in the last presentation, there's a direct link we know between the role of stress and strong emotions as triggering pain. Um, and this again is quite a subjective experience. We know there are biological factors behind this, so diet, stress, health, but we know that there are psychological factors too, and social factors as well. And we're putting this here because in any young person's life, one of the most sort of um, one of the most stressful factors that can come up is school. And that can be both for academic reasons, as well as sort of reasons that come up, sort of um, the normal and typical difficulties that might come up in terms of peer relationships. I think this is a lovely little cycle just to demonstrate a cycle of sort of stress around school leading to pain. And so just starting at the very bottom there, maybe visiting a hospital to have a review or even for an admission. Of course, that means time out of school, missing schoolwork, missing class. And for many children, that can mean sort of worrying about what they've missed. If it's a child who has lots of admissions or lots of appointments, and maybe they're more affected, that can mean sort of growing gaps as well. Growing gaps in their knowledge, making it harder to catch up when they get back. They worry more about catching up when they get back, about how they'll do in class tests or these things. And that can lead to sort of feeling increasingly stressed and anxious about the whole thing. And of course, in a sort of vicious cycle way, that increases the likelihood of experiencing more pain. And you see then we have this sort of vicious cycle set up where stress leads to missing more and more school and more gaps. I think the really important thing here is to think about how we can, as educators and professionals, how we can make the school environment, how we can manage some of this. For many children, I can see directly that it's made a difference to know that school are aware and they understand about the child's medical treatment or their admissions. And for children to feel sort of contained, that there's a plan in place, that there's a catch-up system in place. So having, providing catch-up work, providing a bit of catch-up when they come back, these things can sort of make the difference. And children feeling sort of contained and safe and less anxious about these things. I think it's really important to stop for a moment to say that I know you've heard a little bit today about the sort of neurological implications of sickle cell. We know that children are at higher risk of at the sort of extreme end, overt strokes, where you might see the symptoms you associate with a stroke. But also we've talked about these sort of silent infarcts where they happen without any outward signs. We can't tell from the outside that it's happened, only in sort of MRI scans. As well as sort of other areas of sort of damage that can happen. With all of these, even the silent infarcts, which are really, really common in children who have sickle cell, they can all sort of lead to cognitive difficulties or to generally more difficulties in learning, to lower quality of life, and thinking then about the longer term implications of that as well, lower levels of attainment, employment later on in life, meaning lower quality overall. So we're thinking sort of the really long-term impact of this as well. For that reason, I think we're sharing this hoping that you can, in a way, help us out as well, thinking about the children you care for and that you teach, noticing signs of things that have changed. So noticing if there's a sort of sudden drop in their performance, noticing if, they're suddenly less attentive, noticing any important changes that might just flag that something has changed about their usual levels of performance. I think with that in mind, it's a really good idea around transition from primary to secondary school to meet with the previous school, just to have a sense of sort of the child's level of performance, the child's sort of the impact of their health, what it's been through primary school and learning, to plan in advance if there's anything that you can do to prepare for that in setting the child up for a good start at secondary education. In terms of the cognitive difficulties that we see, so again, cognitive difficulties can happen whether there is sort of physical indications of damage or not. For some children we work with, even where all the scans are sort of clear, they don't show any damage or any silent infarcts, children still can experience some cognitive difficulties. And there's lots of research to support this. Some difficulties sort of start to show up a bit more clearly when they move from primary to secondary school, where the demands sort of increase. Um, these are all of the areas that we see difficulties most commonly, and I think especially processing speed. So children needing a bit more time to take information in, as well as attention and executive functioning. So that sort of getting the information in, right? If we can't pay attention, then the information doesn't have a chance to filter through. So really picking up on these and speaking with parents if that's things that you're noticing. Just to say as well that we know for some children, not all, but there can be an overlap between neurodevelopmental conditions, so like autism or ADHD, that there might be an interplay with cognitive difficulties, and that's important to think about as well. If a child does have a diagnosis or you think they might benefit from one, keeping an eye out for that. And also that there can be an overlap, I guess, between emotional difficulties. So sometimes, most commonly, I hear maybe children who are sort of slightly anxious or have lots of worries, and that can look a bit like memory difficulties. Teachers and parents will say, oh, they're really forgetful, they're not able to hold on to things, and actually when we explore that, children's minds are really busy, they're very anxious, and that makes it hard to concentrate and hold on to the information. I'm just thinking to skip ahead a little bit because we're short on time. But I think the main take home is being on the lookout for any signs of difficulties and touching base with parents to chat about this, especially if you notice that children are falling behind their peers. It's important to let parents know, especially because children too become aware of this, and that adds to the stress as well. Children may benefit from extra support in school. The level of support will depend, of course, on the level of difficulty. Cognitive assessments are something that a child might be able to access. So it's really important to check in with parents so that they can speak with the medical teams to know what's available. School, you guys are a really important part of these assessments, and so we meet with you to get a good understanding as well. The take homes then are that, I think really importantly, cognitive difficulties aren't the ending, right? They don't mean that a child can't learn. They don't mean that they can't be good students. It's just for us to understand their profile, to understand the way of learning that's going to work best for them. I think working to sort of try and reframe difficulties is really important. So to think about not just areas of difficulties, but their strengths as well, highlighting strengths and trying to use strengths as well. So the child builds self-esteem and feels a bit more confident in their learning as well. Keeping sort of open communication with parents to touch base and to chat about these things, to review how sort of how adjustments or accommodations are working, so parents feel confident and they know what's happening, they know what supports are in place, and developing sort of personalized plans, both healthcare and education plans, and keeping sort of, you're part of our team in a way indirectly, so keeping in good communication so that the family and the team around the child can understand more about what's happening and what supports might be needed. I might end with this slide just to say that, of course, children will need time off from school for various things, appointments, or other health-related sort of admissions. It's really important, if we go back to the beginning, thinking about creating that sense of safety for parents sending children and confidence that they're being cared for and supported well, planning for this. So planning catch-up work and discussing with the parents and child how that's going to work best is really helpful. If there is sort of a trusted person that the child is comfortable with, it's really good, I think, to have a person the child can check in with and let chat about how they're feeling, chat about how these things are working. Monitoring closely academic achievements, just to see if there are any changes that you need to flag, or if supports are working, or if more supports might be needed. Keeping an eye out for things like pain and fatigue and how they show up in the classroom, because that, you might notice a child who's flagging more in the afternoon, who seems really tired, who's finding it hard to pay attention. This might be to do with pain and fatigue. And we'd caution really strongly to try and avoid, sometimes children get labeled in sort of difficult ways as lazy or not interested, and just trying to be open and curious about how health might be impacting on their learning, to see how we can support. And the last thing is the transition point. So really importantly, sort of planning for transitions from primary to secondary. We did some focus groups here at King's with parents, and they spoke a lot about the difference it makes when schools show knowledge and when there is open communication. That really means a supportive environment, and parents have talked with us about what a difference that makes. So just touching base and planning and keeping your communication open. I'm going to flag a service we offer at King's, and then I'm going to be quiet for questions. But we offer a consultation service if there are concerns about a child who has sickle cell in your care, in your school. I think we've shared the forms with you, Ralph. So feel free to get in touch if that's something that you would like to know a little bit more about or to access. I'm only 2 minutes over, so I'm going to pause there.
Yeah. Thank you, Stacey. That was excellent.